get ready with me to talk about Lydia. Must you eat so loudly? Lydia was a Gentile adherent of Judaism and a successful businesswoman. She sold a specific type of clothing that was like purple. You want to say hi to the people? Hi to the people. Lydia had traveled to Philippi from Asia Minor, which was like a long way. So I don't feel like doing that kind of math. She was a prominent businesswoman, and although she wasn't a Jew, she believed very much in God, and she wanted to know the God who was strong enough to part a sea and tender enough to love his people. She joined the church at Philippi under Paul's teaching. Lydia was baptized along with the rest of her household in a nearby river, and she insisted that Paul and his entourage accepted her hospitality. Her home became the center of the church of Philippi. Now, Philippi wasn't exactly the kind of place that you would expect a church to prosper or to be planted at all, especially in the early days of Christianity. It was a prosperous Roman colony. Philippi was right on this major highway that was linking the eastern provinces to Rome. At this point in Paul's ministry, Paul had a habit of first starting out preaching in a synagogue before he started going on about his business elsewhere. But even though there wasn't a synagogue, there were groups of praying Jewish and Gentile women. In fact, Paul hadn't even been planning on visiting Philippi at all. But it was on his way to Asia, and he felt led to stay where he was at for a time anyway. A few days later, Paul had a vision telling him to go to Macedonia, and he just saw this vision of people saying, "Come to Macedonia and help us." And when he did eventually go there, he found himself on a riverbank, preaching to the women that have been gathering there for prayer. Unfortunately, shortly after Lydia's conversion, she heard news that Paul and Silas had been whipped and thrown into prison. Paul's crime was to deliver a poor slave girl from an evil spirit that had been harassing Paul and Silas. This slave girl was also a fortune teller, and that evil spirit that was inside of her was making her owners a good portion of profit. So they were mad, threw him in jail. That night, Paul and Silas did what they do best. Great. They didn't lose faith. They sang hymns, ministered to one another while the other prisoners listened. At about midnight that night, the prison started to shake. The doors flew open, and the chains of the prisoners just fell off. And as a result, their jailer was born again. After Paul was released, he went and saw Lydia, stayed with her for a little while. Lydia eventually said goodbye to the man who converted her to Christianity, and Paul went on to his next missionary journey. Lydia was Paul's first convert in Europe and the first member of the Church of Philippi. Philippi was a community that became a great consolation to Paul when he was imprisoned. Perhaps her and the other women at the riverbank's prayers for him helped prepare the way for the gospel to be planted in Europe. Lydia's story is very similar to a lot of ours. She, like many of us, developed a love of a God she did not know and sought him out. And not only did she find him, but she found him in a place you probably wouldn't expect. She met one of his apostles at a riverbank and was baptized, and she very quickly developed a servant's heart towards the man who was bringing the message of God to her and her community. If I had to pick one character of the Bible to be like when it comes to serving my church and my community, I would probably go with Lydia. She didn't do anything phenomenal, and yet she did, because she did what she was called to do for where she was at. We're not all called to be Pauls. We don't all get a Damascus experience. But whether you get a Damascus experience or you just crave that connection with God like she did. We are all his children, and we all have a purpose so long as there's air in our lungs. Lydia's, it seemed, was taking care of her pastor of sorts. I hope that blessed somebody today, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.